Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill and welcome to my garden. Today's topic is roses. They are so wonderful to have in the garden and they're very easy to grow. So today we're going to celebrate them. First, I'm going to give you some easy rose care tips, and then I'm going to follow it with a slideshow of some beautiful roses. So if you don't have any roses in your garden yet, I'm hoping that by the end of the slideshow you're going to rush out and get some. Roses are really easy to find both in your local nurseries and online. But the most important thing you need to do first is to know what your hardiness zone is and choose a variety that will do well there. If you don't know what your hardiness zone is, just do a web search using the words hardiness zones, and when you go to that link you'll get a map. You put in your zip code and it will tell you what the hardiness zone is for your area, and that gives you a good guideline. The second most important thing you need to do when you're choosing an area in your garden to plant your roses is to make sure that they will get a minimum of 6 hours of sunlight a day. Choosing a rose for your garden can be a little bit on the challenging side, only because there are so many different types and cultivars to choose from. When it comes to types, you've got miniature roses, shrub roses, moss roses, English roses, rambling and climbing roses. I mean, the list is just endless. So really what it all comes down to is to choose a rose that speaks to you. If you live in an area that gets a very cold winter like I do, I'm in zone 5, there's one more consideration for you to think about, and that is, do you buy a grafted rose or a non-grafted or own root rose? So what is the difference? A grafted rose is basically a union of a rootstock that's of a different type of a variety that's typically used as a rose rootstock. And then it will have a specific variety, like in this case this is Purple Splash, grafted onto that rootstock. The problem with this is that that graft area is very susceptible to the cold, and it can lose vigor over the years, and it can sucker up from the rootstock, and then you no longer have the variety that you originally bought. An own root rose is just that. It is not grafted. It has been grown from a cutting and it has its own roots. It's not a different variety in the rootstock. So no suckering, fabulous tolerance to cold winters, and it keeps its vigor. If you live in a cold climate and you decide to go with a grafted rose, there's two things I want you to be aware of. One is when you're planting the rose, make sure that you plant the grafted area 3 to 4 inches below the soil surface. This is very important because that will help protect it from the cold. Also, you need to mound soil around that graft during the winter months to protect that graft. Let's talk about pruning roses because there are some good guidelines to follow. In the early spring, when your plants start leafing out, and as long as the nighttime temperatures are staying above 32 degrees, it's safe to start pruning your roses. The first thing I would do is I would remove any dead or damaged branches. I would also remove anything that's crossing or growing into the center of the plant because you don't want that. But the other thing to point out is these upright canes, that's these branches, when you cut them, you want to always prune them to an outward facing bud. So in this case, if I were going to prune this, I would prune it right here. I don't want to prune to an inward facing one because then you're causing a problem. You're letting it grow in towards the center of the plant and you don't want that. The very best time to prune roses is in the spring. You do not want to prune them in the fall because that encourages tender new growth, which is very susceptible to winter kill. Now there is one exception to this rule. If you have a rose that has really tall canes that are going to get damaged by whipping around in the winter winds, that would be okay to prune back. I would do it as early in the fall as possible to give the plant a chance to recover. What about deadheading roses? Deadheading is the removal of spent blossoms. And in the old days, they used to tell us that when you wanted to deadhead a rose blossom, what you wanted to do is to trim it back all the way down the stem below the blossom to the first leaf that had 5 leaflets to it. Now they've figured out that it doesn't make any difference at all, so all you need to do is just snip off or pinch off right below the spent flower and the plant will be just fine. I like to deadhead my roses because I think it makes the plants look really pretty. If you're wondering when and what to feed your roses, there are 2 times of the year where they need fertilizer. The first would be early in the season, and that is to get the plants off to a good start. At that time, you would use what's called a balanced fertilizer. So if you look at any package of fertilizer, there are 3 numbers on the package representing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So for the early fertilizing, you would use one that is a balanced fertilizer, meaning all 3 numbers are the same. For example, 10-10-10 or 16-16-16. The second time that you would fertilize them is after they've had their first flush of bloom. And that is really to encourage more blooming and to reinvigorate the plant. At that time, you would use a fertilizer where the middle number, which represents phosphorus, is the highest. So you could use bone meal or a rose fertilizer. Now, as promised, here is a slideshow of some beautiful roses, just to get you in the mood. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you live in the Spokane area, don't forget that this weekend, June 23rd, is the Spokane Rose Society's annual Rose Show. It is not to be missed. You can go to my website, susansinthegarden.com, and look for my most recent column for all of the details. In the meantime, happy gardening, and I'll see you in a week.